I spent 3 months hand-carving a music box for Mom's birthday. It played her favorite song. Next morning, I found it in the trash under coffee grounds. I pulled it out and slammed it on the breakfast table. It started playing. Nobody moved. My name's Luke. I'm 28. And I want to tell you about the moment I realized my mother didn't love me the way she loved my brother. I mean, I think on some level I always knew. You pick up on things when you're a kid. The way her eyes would light up a little brighter when my older brother Sutton walked into a room. The way she'd hang his crayon drawings on the fridge, but somehow mine always ended up in the recycling bin before the glue dried. But I told myself it was all in my head. Kids are dramatic, right? Everything feels like the end of the world when you're 7. I grew up in a small town outside of Roanoke, Virginia. My dad, Hank, was a carpenter. Not the kind you see on those home renovation shows with perfect teeth and a sponsorship deal. The kind who came home smelling like sawdust and turpentine every single night, with hands so rough they'd catch on everything. He taught me everything I know about working with wood, how to read the grain, how to let the material tell you what it wants to be. He'd say, "Luke, any fool can force a piece of wood into a shape. A real craftsman listens." I thought that was the corniest thing I'd ever heard until I was about 16, and then suddenly it made all the sense in the world. My dad passed away when I was 22. Heart attack. No warning, no long goodbye, just a phone call from my mom at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday telling me to come home. I drove 4 hours in a daze and walked into a house that felt like someone had sucked all the oxygen out of it. Sutton was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with Mom, holding her hand. They looked like a painting. I stood in the doorway for a full 30 seconds before either of them noticed me. That probably should have told me something, but grief has a way of making you ignore the obvious. After Dad died, I threw myself into woodworking. It was the only thing that made me feel close to him. I started small. A cutting board for a friend's wedding. A bookshelf for my apartment. Then I got better. A lot better. I started getting commissions from people around town, then from neighboring towns, then from people who found me online. Turns out there's a real market for handcrafted furniture and decorative pieces when you actually care about what you're making. I wasn't getting rich, but I was making a living doing something my dad would have been proud of. At least, I hope he would have been. Sutton, on the other hand, went a different route. He went to Virginia Tech, got a business degree, and landed a job at a financial firm in Richmond. He made good money. Like, really good money. The kind of money where you stop checking the price of things at restaurants and start saying stuff like, "Let's just get a few bottles for the table." Mom was over the moon about it. Every phone call I had with her, she'd find a way to mention Sutton's promotion, Sutton's new car, Sutton's condo with the view. I'd tell her about a custom dining table I'd just finished, one that took me 3 weeks and turned out better than anything I'd ever made, and she'd say, "Oh, that's nice, honey. Did I tell you Sutton is taking me to that new Italian place downtown?" It stung. I won't pretend it didn't. But I told myself that she was just proud of him, and that was okay. Parents are allowed to be proud of their kids. I just wish she'd save a little of that pride for me too. Now here's where the music box comes in. Every year, Mom's birthday is this big production. Sutton usually handles it. He'll book a fancy dinner, buy her some expensive perfume or jewelry, and she'll post about it on Facebook with a caption like, "Blessed to have the most wonderful son," which, you know, is a fun thing to read when you're her other son who also exists. Last year, he got her a weekend at some spa resort in the mountains. She talked about it for 3 months straight. So about 4 months before her 58th birthday, I decided I was going to make her something special, something that couldn't be bought, something that would actually mean something. My dad used to hum this song to her every morning while he made coffee. Moon River. He'd sing it slightly off-key and she'd pretend to be annoyed, but you could see her smiling behind her coffee mug. It was their thing. After he died, I never heard her mention the song again, but I knew she hadn't forgotten. I decided to hand-carve a music box that played Moon River. Now, if you've never made a music box, let me tell you, it's not like building a shelf. You can't just wing it. I spent 2 weeks just on the design. I wanted the box itself to be walnut, because that was Dad's favorite wood to work with. He always said walnut had soul. The lid would have a hand-carved relief of a crescent moon over a river, because I'm sentimental like that, and also because my dad would have loved the literalness of it. He was never a subtle guy. I ordered a custom music box mechanism from a specialty shop in Switzerland. The real deal. Not some cheap wind-up that sounds like a dying cat. This one played a clear, beautiful rendition of the melody. It cost me about $400 just for the mechanism, which for a guy running a one-man woodworking business was not nothing. But this was for Mom. This was important. For the next 3 months, I worked on that box every single night after I finished my commission work. I'm talking midnight sessions in my workshop, carving by lamplight until my hands cramped. The crescent moon on the lid alone took me 2.5 weeks. I carved it, hated it, sanded it down, and carved it again 3 times before I was happy with it. The river was inlaid with a strip of pale maple that caught the light in a way that honestly took my breath away the first time I saw it finished. The inside was lined with dark velvet, and I engraved a small message on the interior of the lid. For Mom. Dad's still singing. I know that's a lot. But here's the thing. I wasn't just making a birthday present. I was trying to build a bridge. A bridge between me and my mother that said, I know you love Sutton more, but I'm here too, and I love you. And I remember Dad, and I thought maybe this could be the thing that reminds you that I'm worth remembering too. When her birthday finally came, I drove to her house with the music box wrapped in brown paper. Nothing fancy on the outside, just a simple tag that said, Happy birthday, Mom. Love, Luke. I got there, and Sutton had already done his thing. There were flowers on the table, a big gift bag from some department store, and Mom was practically glowing. She opened Sutton's gift first, obviously. It was a designer handbag. I don't know the brand, but I could tell from the way she gasped that it cost more than my rent. Then she turned to me, and I handed her my package. She unwrapped it and looked at the box, and I could see her processing it. She turned it over in her hands. I said, Open the lid, Mom. She did, and Moon River started playing. That tinny, beautiful little melody filled the kitchen, and for about 5 seconds, her face changed. I saw something in her eyes, something soft and old and real. She looked at me, and for the first time in years, I felt like she actually saw me. She said, Luke, this is beautiful. And I believed her. I drove home that night feeling like I'd finally done it, like I'd finally broken through. That feeling lasted about 14 hours. The next morning, I came back to Mom's house. She'd invited me and Sutton over for brunch, which was unusual because normally her brunches were a Sutton-only event. I figured the music box had worked some kind of magic, and I'd finally been promoted from background character to recurring cast member. I even stopped and picked up her favorite pastries from the bakery on Main Street. Almond croissants. The good ones, not the ones that taste like someone described an almond to a machine. I walked in through the kitchen door, the way I always did, and set the pastry box on the counter. Mom wasn't downstairs yet. Sutton was sitting at the table scrolling through his phone, and he barely looked up when I came in. Standard Sutton greeting. The man could make you feel like a lamp walked into the room. I started making coffee because nobody else was going to do it, and that's when I noticed the trash can. The lid was slightly ajar because something was sticking out of it. Something wooden. Something with a curved edge that I recognized immediately because I had spent 72 hours carving that curve. I felt my stomach drop so fast I thought I was going to be sick. I walked over to the trash can and looked inside. There it was. My music box, shoved under a pile of used coffee filters and wet grounds. The lid was open and there were brown stains soaking into the velvet lining. A coffee ground was sitting right on top of the engraving, right on top of Dad still singing. I just stood there. I don't know for how long. It could have been 10 seconds or it could have been 2 minutes. My brain was doing that thing where it tries to find an explanation that doesn't hurt. Maybe she was cleaning and accidentally knocked it into the trash. Maybe she was moving it and it slipped. Maybe there's a perfectly reasonable explanation that doesn't involve my mother throwing away 3 months of my life like it was a used napkin. But the coffee grounds were on top of it. That meant she'd made coffee after she threw it away. She'd stood right there at that counter, looked down into that trash can, seen the music box sitting there, and poured coffee grounds on top of it. That's not an accident. That's a statement. Sutton looked up from his phone. You okay? You look weird. I didn't answer him. I reached into the trash can and pulled the music box out. Coffee grounds fell off it onto the kitchen floor. The velvet inside was ruined. There was a wet brown ring on the maple inlay that I already knew would stain permanently, but the mechanism was still intact. I wiped it off with a dish towel, set it on the middle of the breakfast table, and opened the lid. Moon River started playing. The sound filled that kitchen like a ghost walking through the door. Sutton stared at the box, then at me, then at the trail of coffee grounds on the floor leading from the trash can to the table. His face did something I'd never seen before. It wasn't guilt exactly, It was more like the look of someone who just realized they're standing in a room where something very bad is about to happen and they can't find the exit. That's when Mom came downstairs. She was in her bathrobe, hair up, and she walked into the kitchen already talking. "Sutton, honey, did you start the coffee? I thought I smelled." She stopped. She saw the music box on the table. She saw the coffee grounds on the floor. She saw me standing there with a dish towel in my hand, and an expression that I imagined looked something like a man who'd just been stabbed by someone he'd been trying to hug. Moon River was still playing. It's a short song on the mechanism, maybe 45 seconds, but I swear in that moment it felt like it played for an hour. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. The three of us just stood there in that kitchen while my dead father's favorite song tinkled out of a box that my mother had buried under garbage. When the song ended, the silence was worse. Mom spoke first. "Luke, I can explain." "Can you?" I said, and I meant it. I genuinely wanted to hear what possible explanation could exist for this. She did that thing she always does when she's cornered. She went on offense. "It was an accident. I was cleaning up last night and things got moved around and it must have ended up in there by mistake." "Under coffee grounds," I said. "I wasn't paying attention. You made coffee this morning. You looked into that trash can and saw it, and you still poured grounds on top of it." She crossed her arms. "Luke, you're making this into a bigger deal than it is. It's a box." I said I liked it. I did like it, but I can't keep every little thing people give me. The house is cluttered enough as it is. Every little thing. 3 months of work. $400 for the mechanism alone. An engraving about my dead father. Every little thing. I looked at Sutton. He was still sitting at the table, and he had this expression like he was trying to become invisible. He knew. Of course he knew. He'd probably known our whole lives that Mom treated me like a spare part, and he'd never said a word because why would he? He was the favorite. You don't question a system that's built to benefit you. "Sutton," I said, "did you know about this?" He shrugged. Actually shrugged. "Man, I just got here. I don't know what's going on." "You're looking at what's going on. It's right there on the table." Mom stepped in. "Luke, stop being dramatic. You're upsetting your brother." "I'm upsetting my brother. I just pulled a handmade gift for my mother out of the garbage, and I'm the one causing problems." That sentence rewired something in my brain. Something that had been holding on for 28 years finally let go. I could almost hear the snap. "Mom," I said, and my voice was steady, which surprised me. That box took me 3 months to make. I carved it by hand. The mechanism cost me $400. I engraved a message about Dad on the inside. "And you threw it in the trash and covered it in coffee grounds the same night I gave it to you." "You're exaggerating. It wasn't the same night. The coffee is from this morning. The box was under the grounds. That means you threw it away last night. The night of your birthday. The night I gave it to you." She didn't have a response for that, so she did what she always does. She redirected. "Well, maybe if you'd asked me what I actually wanted instead of just assuming I'd want some wooden box, this wouldn't have happened." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. She didn't want what I had to give. She never had. I picked the music box up off the table. I held it for a second, feeling the weight of it, the smooth walnut that I'd sanded by hand for hours, the little imperfection on the left side of the moon where my chisel had slipped it to in the morning. Then I tucked it under my arm. "I'm leaving," I said. "Oh, here we go," Mom said, rolling her eyes. "The Luke show. Everything is always about you." "No, Mom. That's the problem. Nothing has ever been about me. Not once in my entire life. And I'm done pretending that's okay." I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I just walked to my truck, put the music box on the passenger seat, and drove away. I made it about 3 miles before I had to pull over because I couldn't see the road anymore. I sat in that truck on the shoulder of Route 11, and I just let it all come. Every birthday where I was an afterthought. Every accomplishment that got a polite nod and a subject change. Every time I watched Sutton get celebrated for existing while I worked myself to the bone for a fraction of the acknowledgement. I sat there for a long time, and when I was done, I drove home, put the music box on my workbench, and I didn't call my mother. Not that day, not the next day, not for a very long time. The first 2 weeks after I walked out of my mom's kitchen were rough. I won't sugarcoat it. I barely worked. I'd go into my workshop, stare at whatever project was on my bench, and just not be able to focus. My hands, which had been steady enough to carve a crescent moon out of walnut, couldn't even hold a pencil straight. I lost a commission because I missed a deadline. A custom coffee table for a couple in Charlottesville who'd been waiting 6 weeks. I emailed them some excuse about a supply delay, but the truth was I just couldn't make myself care about anything. I also made the mistake of checking my phone constantly. Not because I expected my mom to call and apologize. I'm not that naive. But because some stupid, stubborn part of me still hoped she would. She didn't. Sutton didn't either, which honestly stung almost as much. We weren't close, but he was still my brother. He watched me pull a handmade gift out of the trash, and his biggest contribution was a shrug. That's the kind of thing that rewrites your understanding of a relationship in about half a second. My buddy Cordell was the one who pulled me out of it. Cordell and I had been friends since high school. He was the kind of guy who'd show up to your house uninvited with a six-pack and a terrible movie, and somehow that was exactly what you needed. He came by my workshop one evening, saw the state of things, and said, "Brother, you look like someone microwaved a sad burrito and tried to pass it off as a person." I told him everything. The music box, the trash, the coffee grounds, the confrontation. He sat there on my workbench, which I told him 100 times not to sit on, and he just listened. When I was done, he said, "Your mom's broken, man. And that's not your fault, and it's not your job to fix. But right now you're letting her break you too, and I'm not going to sit here and watch that happen." He was right. I knew he was right. But knowing something and feeling it are two very different things. The turning point came about 3 weeks in, and it came from the most unexpected place. I got an email from a woman named Jolene Whitaker. She ran a high-end interior design firm out of Richmond. She'd seen some of my work online, specifically a set of hand-carved floating shelves I'd made for a restaurant in town, and she wanted to talk about a potential collaboration. Her clients were the type of people who wanted one-of-a-kind, artisan-made pieces for their homes, and she thought my work would be a perfect fit. I almost didn't respond. I was in such a bad headspace that I figured it was probably spam or someone who'd lose interest the second they heard my prices. But Cordell saw the email over my shoulder and literally said, "If you don't respond to that, I'm going to respond for you, and I'll use your embarrassing old email address from middle school." Considering that email address involved the word SK8 Raboy and a truly unfortunate number of X's, I responded myself. Jolene and I met for coffee at a place in Richmond the following week. She was sharp, late 40s, silver streak in her dark hair, the kind of person who looked like she'd never wasted a minute of her life. She looked through my portfolio, which was just a bunch of photos on my phone because I still didn't have a proper website, and she said, "You have something that most people in this industry don't. Your work has warmth. It feels like it was made by someone who actually gives a damn." That might have been the nicest thing anyone had said to me in months, maybe years. We started working together. She'd bring me into projects. I'd consult on what kind of pieces would work in the space, and then I'd build them. My first project with her was a set of custom nightstands for a couple renovating a farmhouse in the Shenandoah Valley. Hand-carved black cherry with dovetail joints visible on the outside because Jolene said her clients wanted to see the craftsmanship. I poured everything into those nightstands. When I delivered them, the wife actually cried. She said they were the most beautiful things she'd ever had in her home. I sat in my truck afterward and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt like what I did mattered. Over the next few months, things started moving fast. Jolene connected me with more clients. I raised my prices because she told me I was criminally undercharging, and she was right. I finally built a website. Cordell's girlfriend, a graphic designer named Waverly, helped me with the branding. She designed a logo that was this simple outline of a hand plane, and it was perfect. I started an online shop for smaller pieces, cutting boards, jewelry boxes, decorative trays, and orders started trickling in. I also started seeing someone. Her name was Gemma. She was a veterinarian who'd come into my shop because she wanted a custom shelf for her clinic's waiting room, something warm and inviting so the animal's owners would feel calm. We talked for about an hour and a half about wood grain and anxious dogs, and by the end of it, I was pretty sure I wanted to talk to her for the rest of my life. She was funny and direct, and she had this way of looking at you when you talked that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. First date was dinner at a place neither of us could really afford. Second date was her helping me sand a tabletop while we listened to old records in my workshop. By the third date, I knew I was in trouble. The good kind. I didn't tell Gemma about the music box situation right away. I didn't want to be the guy who unloads all his family baggage on the third date. But about 2 months in, she saw the music box sitting on a shelf in my workshop. It was still stained. I hadn't been able to bring myself to restore it. She picked it up and opened the lid, and Moon River played, and she said, "This is gorgeous. Why does it look like someone dunked it in coffee?" So I told her, all of it. She sat on the workshop stool and listened, and when I was done, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Luke, that music box is the most loving thing I've ever heard of someone making. And anyone who would throw that away has something seriously wrong with their heart. That's not about you. That's about her." I'd heard versions of that from Cordell, from myself, in my own head, at 3 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. But hearing it from Gemma, in her calm, certain voice, with her hand on my arm, something finally clicked. I stopped carrying it like a verdict on my worth and started seeing it for what it was. Evidence of my mother's failure, not mine. Meanwhile, I hadn't spoken to Mom or Sutton in almost 5 months. Mom hadn't tried to reach out. Not once. No call, no text, no email. Sutton sent me one text about 3 weeks after the incident that said, "Hey bro, Mom says you're being dramatic. You should probably call her." I didn't respond. Partly because I was angry, and partly because "Mom says you're being dramatic" told me everything I needed to know about whose side he was on. Spoiler alert. It was the same side he'd been on since we were kids. What I didn't know, because I'd gone fully no contact, was that things were starting to go very wrong for Sutton. And by extension, for Mom. I wouldn't find out until later just how wrong. But the first crack appeared in the most predictable way possible. Sutton's money, the thing Mom loved most about him, was about to become a very big problem. And the irony of what was coming next would have made my dad laugh until he cried. I found out about Sutton's situation through Cordell, who heard it from his cousin Deacon, who worked at the same financial firm in Richmond. Apparently, Sutton had been making some very risky investment decisions with client money. Not illegal, technically, but reckless enough that when the market corrected, several of his clients lost significant portions of their portfolios. The firm didn't fire him, but they demoted him hard, stripped his title, cut his salary by nearly 40%, and took away all his high-value accounts. He went from being the golden boy to the guy people whispered about in the break room. Now, I want to be clear about something. I didn't celebrate when I heard this. I'm not that kind of person. Sutton is still my brother, and I don't wish financial ruin on anyone. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a small, petty part of me that thought, so money doesn't make you untouchable after all. That part of me existed for about 30 seconds before the bigger, more human part of me felt bad about it. Growth, I guess. What I didn't expect was what happened next. About 7 months after the music box incident, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered because I was expecting a call back from a lumber supplier. It was my Aunt Rosalind, Mom's sister. Rosalind had always been the reasonable one in the family. She'd never played favorites, never stirred the pot, and she'd been one of the few people who came to my woodworking shop's unofficial grand opening, which was really just me and Cordell hanging a sign and eating pizza in the parking lot. "Luke, honey, I need to talk to you about your mother," Rosalind said. My first instinct was to hang up, but Rosalind had earned enough goodwill that I stayed on the line. Turns out, Mom had been leaning heavily on Sutton financially for the past few years. More than I knew. He'd been paying her mortgage, her car payment, and most of her monthly expenses. Not because she couldn't work, but because Sutton had offered and Mom had decided that was simply how things were going to be now. She'd gotten comfortable. Real comfortable. The kind of comfortable where you stop checking your own bank balance because someone else is covering everything. And now Sutton couldn't cover it anymore. His salary cut meant he could barely handle his own bills, let alone hers. He'd told Mom about 2 months ago that he needed to scale back, and apparently she hadn't taken it well. Rosalind said there had been arguments. Big ones. The kind where Mom says things like, "After everything I've done for you, and you're going to let your mother lose her house." Which, let me just point out, is exactly the kind of thing she never would have said to me, because she never would have asked me in the first place. You can't be disappointed by the son you never relied on. She's scared, Luke, Rosalind said. Her savings are almost nothing. She's been living way beyond her means, and now the safety net is gone. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, "Rosalind, I hear you. But what does this have to do with me?" There was a pause. She won't admit it, but she needs help. And Sutton? Well, Sutton is dealing with his own mess right now. So the plan is to call the other son, the one whose gift she threw in the trash. Rosalind sighed. I know how it looks. And I told her she needs to apologize to you before anything else. She's too proud, Luke. She's too proud and too stubborn, and it's going to cost her everything. I told Rosalind I appreciated the call, but I wasn't going to chase my mother down to beg for the chance to help someone who threw away the most meaningful thing I'd ever made. Rosalind said she understood. We hung up, and I went back to my workshop and built a beautiful set of cabinet doors for a kitchen in Arlington and tried not to think about it. About 2 weeks later, Gemma and I were at home. She'd practically moved in at that point, when there was a knock at my door. I opened it, and there was Sutton. He looked rough. Not in a dramatic, movie way, but in the way people look when they haven't been sleeping well and they've been eating gas station food for too long. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes had that hollow, slightly panicked quality. "Can I come in?" he said. I let him in. Gemma made coffee, because Gemma is the kind of person who makes coffee for people even when those people don't necessarily deserve coffee. We sat at my kitchen table, and Sutton started talking. He told me about the demotion, about the money problems, about Mom calling him every day, sometimes twice, asking when things were going to go back to normal. He said, "She keeps saying I owe her. Like raising me was a transaction, and now the bill is due." I almost felt bad for him. Almost. But then he said something that made it very hard to feel bad. "Look, Luke, I know things have been weird between you and Mom, but she's still our mother. And I was thinking maybe you could help out a little, just until I get back on my feet." I stared at him. "Sutton, she threw a gift I spent 3 months making into the trash. She covered it in coffee grounds. And when I confronted her about it, she told me I was being dramatic. You were there. You shrugged." He looked at the table. "I know. That was messed up. I should have said something. But you didn't." "I didn't. And now you're here because you need something from me." He didn't deny it. I'll give him that much. He had the decency not to pretend this was a social visit. I told him I wasn't going to write a check to a woman who'd made it clear my contributions were garbage. Literally garbage. But I said something else too, and I meant it. I said, if Mom wants my help, she can come to me herself. She can look me in the eye, and she can acknowledge what she did. Not because I need the satisfaction, because I need to know that I'm not just a backup plan. Sutton left. I didn't think anything would come of it. Mom was too proud. She'd sooner sell her house than admit she'd been wrong. At least, that's what I thought. 3 weeks later, my phone rang. It was Mom. "Luke," she said, and her voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Rosalind says I need to talk to you. Sutton says I need to talk to you. I don't really know what I'm supposed to say. How about the truth?" I said. There was a long silence. Then she said, "Can you come to the house?" I told her I'd be there Saturday, but I wasn't going alone. I asked Gemma to come with me, not because I needed backup, but because I needed a witness. Someone who could confirm later that whatever happened actually happened, and that I wasn't just the dramatic one making things up again. Gemma said yes without hesitating. That's when I knew I was going to marry that woman. I also did something else before Saturday. I went to my workshop, took the music box off the shelf, and spent 2 evenings restoring it. I cleaned the coffee stains as best I could. The velvet lining was beyond saving, so I replaced it with new fabric. The maple inlay had a faint shadow where the coffee had been, but honestly, it almost looked intentional now. Like a patina, like it had a story. The mechanism still worked perfectly. I wound it up and Moon River played, clear and sweet, and I sat there in my workshop listening to my dad's song, and I thought, okay, let's see how this goes. I put the music box in a bag and loaded it in my truck. Saturday was going to be interesting. Saturday came, and Gemma and I drove to Mom's house. It was early October, and the trees along Route 11 were doing that thing where they turn so beautiful it almost feels aggressive, like nature is showing off just to make your problems seem smaller. Gemma held my hand the whole drive. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. When we pulled into the driveway, I noticed the house looked different. Not dramatically, but in the way that happens when someone stops keeping up with things. The gutters needed cleaning. One of the shutters was crooked. The garden that Mom used to maintain with military precision was overgrown and sad-looking. It hit me that this was what happened when the money dried up. All the things Sutton's paycheck had been covering were starting to show their cracks. Mom opened the door before we even knocked. She looked older than I remembered. Not old, just older. Thinner. She was wearing a sweater I recognized from years ago, which was unusual because Mom used to buy new clothes every season. "Come in," she said, and she stepped aside without making eye contact. Sutton was already there, sitting in the living room. He stood up when we walked in, nodded at me, and shook Gemma's hand with the awkward formality of someone who knows they're in a room where they've lost all moral authority. We all sat down, Mom in her chair, Sutton on the couch, Gemma and I across from them. It felt like a summit meeting for the world's most dysfunctional country. Mom started talking, and at first it was exactly what I expected. She talked around the issue, how hard things had been, how she wasn't sleeping, how she felt abandoned, which was rich. I let her go because I knew she needed to get through the preamble before the part that actually mattered. Then she stopped, looked at her hands, and said, "I know you want me to talk about the music box. I want you to talk about whatever is true," I said. She was quiet for a long time. Gemma squeezed my hand. Finally, Mom said, "I threw it away because it made me feel things I didn't want to feel. Your father used to hum that song, and when I heard it come out of that box, I was right back in this kitchen with him. And he was alive, and everything was okay. And then the song ended, and he was still gone, and I was still here, and I couldn't stand it. So I got rid of it. It wasn't about you, Luke. It was about me not being able to handle what you made me remember." I sat there and processed that. Part of me wanted to accept it because it was the first honest thing she'd said to me in years. But another part of me knew that was only half the story. "Mom, I hear that," I said, "and I believe you. But the music box isn't the only thing. You've treated me like an afterthought my entire life. Sutton gets celebrated. I get tolerated. You talk about his job and his gifts and his accomplishments like they're the only things worth mentioning. And when I try to show you what I can do, what Dad taught me to do, you call it a little thing. You said every little thing. About something I spent 3 months making with my hands." She flinched. I could see Sutton staring at the floor. "And when I walked out of this kitchen," I continued, "you didn't call. Not once. 7 months, and you didn't pick up the phone. Sutton showed up at my door, and you know what he wanted? Money. Not for himself. For you. That was the first contact I had from this family in 7 months. Not an apology. A request." Mom's eyes were wet. She wiped them with the back of her hand. "I didn't call because I didn't know what to say. I knew I was wrong. I've known it for years, Luke. I just didn't know how to fix it. And the longer I waited, the harder it got, and then it felt like it was too late." "It's not too late," I said, "but it has to change. For real. Not just because you need financial help. Because I'm your son and I deserve better than what you've given me." She nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't deflect. For the first time in my entire life, my mother just sat there and accepted responsibility for how she treated me. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't fall to her knees or sob or deliver a speech. She just said, "You're right. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Luke. I won't pretend that fixed everything." An apology doesn't erase 28 years of favoritism. But it was a start. And it was real. I could tell because she didn't try to qualify it or explain it away. She just sat in it. Then I did something that surprised everyone in the room, including myself. I reached into the bag I'd brought and pulled out the music box. I set it on the coffee table between us. Mom looked at it, and her hand went to her mouth. "I restored it," I said. "The stain on the inlay is still there, but the mechanism works fine. It still plays." I opened the lid. Moon River filled the room. Mom closed her eyes. Tears ran down her cheeks. Sutton looked away. Gemma put her arm around me, and I just let the song play, all 45 seconds of it. When it ended, I closed the lid. "I'm not giving this back to you yet," I said. "When I feel like things have actually changed, when I feel like you see me the way you see Sutton, you'll get it back." Think of it as motivation. Mom actually laughed at that. A real laugh. Small and broken, but real. "You sound like your father," she said. "Good," I said. "He was the best person I've ever known." Now here's what happened after. I did help Mom with her finances, but not the way Sutton had. I didn't write a blank check. I sat down with her, went through her budget, and helped her cut the waste. I fixed things around the house myself. Replaced those gutters, fixed the shutter, rebuilt the back porch steps that had been rotting for 2 years. I did it with my own hands, the same hands she'd dismissed, and she watched me do it. I think that was part of what changed things between us. Sutton and I had an honest conversation about a month later. He admitted he'd always known Mom treated me differently and never said anything because it was easier not to. I told him that was cowardly. He agreed. We're not best friends now, but we're brothers in a way that actually means something. He's rebuilding at his firm. He's humbler now, which looks good on him. Jolene made me a partner in a new venture, a curated line of artisan home goods sold through high-end design showrooms. My pieces are in homes all over Virginia, and we just got our first order from New York. Dad's tools hang on the wall of my expanded workshop, and every time I pick up his favorite chisel, I can almost hear him saying, "See? Listen to the wood." Gemma and I got married last spring. Small ceremony in our backyard. Cordell was my best man and gave a speech that included the phrase, "emotionally intelligent lumberjack," and I'll never forgive him for it. Mom was there. She sat in the front row and cried, and afterwards she hugged me and said, "Your father would be so proud of you." For the first time, I believed she meant it. Not as a thing you say, as the truth. The music box? I gave it back to her on Christmas. She'd earned it. It sits on her nightstand now. She told me she plays it every morning. I choose to believe her, not because I'm naive, because believing it makes the world a little better, and my dad would have liked that. Last week, I was in my workshop finishing a hand-carved cradle for a couple expecting their first baby. Moon River came on the playlist I had running. I stopped and listened to the whole thing, and I thought about my dad humming it in the kitchen, my mom throwing the box away, me pulling it out of the coffee grounds, and everything that came after. You know what I realized? That music box was never really about my mom. It was about me. It was proof that I could take something broken and make it beautiful, that I could pour love into something even when love hadn't been poured into me, and that the people who see that, the people who really see it, are the ones worth keeping. My name is Luke. I'm 29 now. I make things with my hands, and I'm done proving my worth to people who aren't paying attention. The people who matter already know.